Finally, the last component of the National Biodiversity Assessment, and one of the most important components, is the final chapter, which brings together the results of the assessment and makes clear recommendations. And we call this the Priority Actions chapter. So this is where we move from the complexities of ecosystem assessment towards a clear set of evidence-based priority actions. And we do this collaboratively with stakeholder input. In South Africa, we draw from our Marine Biodiversity Working Group, which is the reference group. And this is a working group that's led by the Department of Forestry, Fisheries and Environment. We draw from managers and practitioners on the ground. So, for example, the Marine Protected Area Unit, even airport compliance staff have helped us with the set of priority actions, invasive species researchers. So it's really a full range and includes decision and policy makers and policy advisors. SANBI is very active at the Science Policy Interface, so this is particularly useful. And in South Africa, we do this work by drawing together the many relevant agencies, and that includes the fisheries, ocean and coastal management and conservation and compliance staff from the Department of Forestry, Fisheries and Environment, the South African Environmental Observation Network, so critical because of their monitoring work, the South African Institute for Aquatic Biodiversity, the CSIR, universities, national and provincial conservation entities, and NGOs. We have a number of other smaller task teams and working groups like the Marine Ecosystem Committee and the Marine Taxonomy Working Group that helps to distill priorities in relevant areas. The priority actions link to existing policy plans and frameworks. And so there's a clear relationship between the National Biodiversity Assessment, the National Biodiversity Strategy and Action Plan, which is a longer-term planning and strategy document, and the National Biodiversity Framework. And really the NBA interfaces with these other frameworks and strategies in two key ways. Firstly, the NBA informs the development of both of these by providing the scientific foundation on the pressures on marine biodiversity and how they are impacting on its status. Secondly, the NBA supports the implementation of these strategies and plans through provision of science-based evidence and by objectively distilling a set of priority actions, and then these inform future iterations. There's really no perfect sequence for developing these, and these various products are often developed in parallel or overlapping. As the focus of this video is actually how we do the National Biodiversity Assessment, I'm going to walk you through how we develop the priority actions. And it's an iterative process with many improvements. In the beginning, there's a scoping phase where usually at the start of the cycle for the next biodiversity assessment, we work together with stakeholders to distill an initial set of priority actions based on the experience of those stakeholders. So this is not looking at any of the results, but just capturing the current status. And the priorities that emerge at that initial workshop are frequently driven by current events and are usually a component of the final set of priority action, at least in the 3 cycles of assessment that I've been involved in, but frequently miss many of the priorities because a systematic assessment has yet to take place. Secondly, once the findings of the whole assessment have been summarized, they are presented at multiple review workshops. So I mentioned the National Biodiversity Working Group is the reference group for the marine realm of the National Biodiversity Assessment, and very much active part with regular updates. So that group provides inputs and priority are discussed, but there are multiple other review workshops during the process of the National Biodiversity Assessment. And for example, the Marine Ecosystem Committee and other task teams are all actively discussing results and developing priorities. Then importantly, there's a dedicated, what we call a responses workshop. And at that workshop, we walk systematically through the key findings. We review the progress from previous assessments and then develop an initial set of priority actions. And it's quite a substantial set of actions. And these haven't been grouped or basketed yet at this stage. Then there's the consideration of findings from other realms and components of the National Biodiversity Assessment. And this phase is really led by Andrew Skono as the overall lead. And this is where we develop key messages and a broad set of priority actions that often are grouped by themes. And this is where cross-realm priority actions, so for example, there are pressures or results that are really reflecting synergies in the estuarine and the terrestrial and the marine components of the coastal realm. These are often prioritized at this stage or identified as relevant across realm and sometimes get elevated in the reporting. The next step is to link the priority actions back to the National Biodiversity Strategy and Action Plan and the National Biodiversity Framework. But we also check in with the spatial prioritization tools, so in the marine realms, EBSAs, the Marine and Coastal Spatial Biodiversity Plan, and the National Protected Area Expansion Strategy, depending on current events in terms of protected area expansion. But that's one of our key guiding documents. So by checking in and linking the priority actions to those that are captured elsewhere in policy and legislation, we start grouping them at this stage. Then the proposed actions are refined and clustered across all the realms. And at this stage, it's really seeing where different actions fit into different themes and clusters of actions. And then finally, we group for the marine realm the actions and determine the top 10 priority actions. This is something that was first done in our assessment in 2004 and has had a lot of traction. So we have kept up this process of having the top 10 priority actions for the marine realm together with our collaborators and stakeholders. This is just to show you the top 10 priority actions, and you can see they're actually quite broad. And so I'm not going to go into the detail here, but this slide also demonstrates a key element in the National Biodiversity Assessment where we frequently have a kind of headline message or action and then an increasing amount of detail. There'll be sometimes a very short heading and then a kind of sentence or bullet level and then much more detail. And the priority actions chapter really reflects this because you're wanting to be able to speak to your different audiences. Ultimately, all of South Africa's priority actions relate to the three-way action plan for biodiversity, as described in the National Biodiversity Framework. And this is really important. Ecosystem assessments need to provide recommendations that are grounded within the relevant policy and strategies. These are to avoid further loss and ensure sustainable resource use, to protect marine ecosystems, and to promote the recovery of resources and species and the rehabilitation of marine ecosystems. Finally, the process of ecosystem and biodiversity assessment really helps to distill national research priorities. And if these are addressed, this can really improve the knowledge base to assess and manage marine biodiversity in the country. Marine biodiversity spans the three levels of ecosystem, species, and genes. And as such, these priorities cut across these different components and really help to highlight and leverage resources to these priority knowledge gaps. This is really one of the the important benefits of the National Biodiversity Assessment. By taking this bird's eye view and bringing so many stakeholders together, we're able to have nationally agreed knowledge gaps and research priorities that can then be included in, for example, funding calls. So in all, this really helps us to build the best possible knowledge base for biodiversity and ecosystem assessment in the country. Thank you.